it's not an alien spore that came in from Mars and just implanted itself in this virgin American soil. I mean, every one of these ideas, I think, has important, precedence in other movements in American history and American foreign policy.
So I created a card to describe you, and so that we could send it out to our members. And I think on the end of the card I say, and he broke with the administration over Iraq. If that's true, why?
Well, it was not for a moral reason, in the sense that if you could actually unseat a guy like Saddam Hussein, that somehow there's just no justification for doing that. The reason was completely, in a sense, practical, and it came out of this view I have about the difficulty of nation building, that for the United States to undertake an action, a very grave action of this sort, requires a seriousness of purpose, a commitment, both financial, moral, material, that the administration, it seemed to me, was not remotely beginning to fulfill. At that time, I also thought that the connection to terrorism was bogus, fairly clearly. The weapons of mass destruction is a more complicated issue, because I keep getting into arguments with people about this that absolutely will not believe this, but I actually think that the administration principals really did believe that those weapons were there, and they were as surprised as anyone else when they turned out not to be. But, I think the main issue was that they vastly overestimated how hard American power could be used to transform the world for positive political purposes. I mean, that's the fundamental mistake, and given the difficulty that, that project imposed, I think, it would have been more prudent if they'd simply said, the Security Council permits it, we will go ahead with a big coalition, or as big a coalition as we can, and if not, we're going to leave well enough alone. But they chose not to do that.
I hope you realize that you're not going to get a Christmas card from Dick Cheney. I would like to ask you another question. You share a hall in Stanford with an American hero. He was the ground commander in Afghanistan for President Bush. He then retired from the military, and then he became the American ambassador in Kabul for President Obama. And now he's retired from that, and now he's down in Stanford talking to you, I guess, every day. Walt,
quite literally, he's my next door neighbor.
So we're going to have him here the first week in February, or the last week in January. He's a wonderful speaker. He's published quite a number of articles, so he's right at home in the Academy. Now, we're going to call the card something like this: Afghanistan, 10 years later. We've been at war there for 10 long years. You're too young to remember, but there was a great Virginia general besides George Washington. There was George Catlett Marshall, and he fought all the way through World War II with the British Imperial Chiefs of Staff, because they kept wanting all these maneuvers around that would take years, and Marshall said over and over again, America cannot fight a 7 years war. No, nix 9. Then he'd go to the map and say, here's London, here's Berlin. This is a straight line. That's the way we're going. And, of course, that's the way we went. So 10 years on, were you in favor of the incursion into Afghanistan, and were you in favor of Obama's surge in Afghanistan? What's up in Afghanistan?
Well, first of all, I think everybody was in favor of the original invasion, because you had 19 al-Qaeda big training bases, and they were basically all dismantled. And I actually have to admit I was in favor of Obama's surge, because we never put the kind of effort into Afghanistan that we should have, because of the Iraq invasion. And I figured in 18, and I actually like the fact that he announced a date by which the surge would also end simultaneously with the surge itself, because I thought to myself, in 18 months you're going to know whether you can actually make this thing work or not, and if not, you got to pull the plug on it. I think what's happened is that, in a sense, the commitment has become the purpose of the war. The purpose of the war was to control al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda's gone largely from Afghanistan. We can prevent them from coming back in, I think, largely with drones and aircraft. You don't need a big ground presence there. And right now we're fighting the Taliban, who are Pashtuns that happen to live in that part of the Afghanistan. They don't want us there. And so, in a sense, the means by which we were getting rid of al-Qaeda has become the end of the war itself. And so and given the extremely poor legitimacy of the Karzai government, the real failure of any true nation-building effort, I think what we proved is we can stay there as long as we want, but the moment we're out, the thing collapses, and so we'd better, I would say, get out sooner rather than later.
Small question. You talked about accountability, the strangeness of the American political history. What do you think about the fact that 4 guys might be in a taxi in Yemen and that we blow them to smithereens knowing full well that one is an American citizen?
Well, look, that's obviously a very troubling thing, but it does seem to me that there are probably other, precedents that if actually an American citizen goes over to the other side and takes up arms against the United States under the usual laws, and I'm not a lawyer, but it seems to me that under the normal laws of war, you kill them like any other person that's shooting at you. What makes this one different is it's not a declared war. It's a kind of ongoing terrorism campaign, but in a sense, this guy that we assassinated, was more dangerous than your average soldier. Let's say volunteered to fight on the German side in World War II. So I have qualms about it, but in the end, it does seem to me, it was a justifiable action.
Now, tell us again, because it's long now been out and published and is in paperback in several editions, what is the major theme of The End of History?
Right, I didn't think I could get through the evening without being asked some version of that question. The end of history is the end in terms, in the sense of end as goal or objective. The Marxists had a view of the end of history. The end of history would be a communist utopia. That is to say, human civilization would evolve through all of these different stages, the penultimate of which would be bourgeois democracy and capitalism, and then they'd end up in a communist utopia. And all I did was say, well, they're basically right about the first part of that evolution, but we're just never going to get to the communist utopia. The penultimate station is the final station, as far as anyone can see, that we're going to get off at this station called liberal democracy and market economy. And I think, I'm still right about that, because I don't think that in 50 or 100 years we're all going to be living under a Chinese communist, mixed authoritarian capitalist regime. I don't think we're going to be living in an Islamic theocracy. I think we're going to be living in some form of liberal democracy with some form of market economy. And so that's the meaning of the end of history.
Globally?
Well, complicated, because you also got to prevent yourself from decaying in the meantime, and that's the challenge that I think we've got to meet in the next generation.
You end your wonderful 600 pages with a short chapter, best chapter, the short one, and you are making an assessment about whether the Chinese will make it beyond now, in the sense that they have, if you wish, red mandarins, and they have a strong state, somewhat a weak society, in that famous argument that was made by other scholars. So you don't seem to have a overwhelming view that somehow the rule of law and accountability are on the horizon right over the Great Wall, ready to leap into the new Forbidden City. Is that right?
No, I think that the Chinese have been too competent in their management of the modernization process, so that, in a sense, too many people have a stake in stability and getting richer and so forth. I think the problem they're going to face is down the road. They're just not going to be able to keep this up. Their economic model is running out of steam, I think, as we speak, this export-driven model of theirs. And once it starts to run out of steam, then I think a lot of the contradictions in that regime are going to appear. There's a good reason why we want accountability and rule of law. We want predictability. We want governments not just that can make good short-term decisions, but ones that are vetted by, public opinion, that have some, deep, resonances in the society. And I think that's, ultimately where the Chinese are going to have trouble. You just look at this high-speed rail accident that they had over the summer, where they couldn't even have an open discussion of the causes of the accident. They buried the first couple of railway cars, so that no one would actually know what caused the accident. And you can't run a modern society on the basis of that kind of lack of transparency and lack of any formal government accountability.
I'm an opera fan, and they've got me again because just this week, the officials in the other Forbidden City, they live right down the street from the old one, decided that the new opera, all ready to open in the grand, beautiful opera house in Beijing, being the story of Sun Yat-sen and his arrival in a powerful position in 1911, was too risky because it showed his love life, which has always worried me about where do communists think children come from. But we will not be seeing that on the boards in Beijing. Please sit where you are, because I'm going to go visit with some of the faculty who are so tired of hearing me that they're dying to ask their own question. And there he is, sitting in all his economic glory here. So, sir, would you please ask a question?
Thanks. Thank you for taking me by surprise. But I'll gin one up. Professor, with respect to the United States and individualism and accountability and democracy, you've listed a number of problems with respect to anti-statism, and on the other hand, there may be problems with respect to China where there's no accountability and no rule of law, but places like Singapore and others have, of course, copied that model. And so it looks like, just from my own naive view, that they've got the energy over there without accountability and without rule of law and without individualism and without respect of the rights of the individual. We have all those things here, and we seem to be running aground. Perhaps I'm looking at it incorrectly, and maybe you could help me out here.
No, I think in the short run, that's absolutely right. The one thing that these Asian authoritarian regimes have, they've got good managers, of their governments, and they can make decisions. They can make decisions, very rapidly, and they're pretty good ones by and large. And we are, by contrast, because we have so many checks and balances in our system, and our underlying society is fairly polarized, we're completely paralyzed in a whole range of important decisions that we ought to be making. But I think that when you're judging a political system, you cannot take the short-run view of any particular one decade, because the durability of a political system is really a kind of multi-generational one. And you have to ask the question, how long can these Asian authoritarian regimes sustain that level of performance? And I would say not forever. And the one thing the Chinese have never, ever been able to figure out is this, what they call the bad emperor problem. If you have a authoritarian decision maker, no rule of law, no democratic accountability, how do you